Look at me, chat! I'm the React content now! As Asmongold put out a video basically asking, can you feel that the vibes have changed? And yes, I can, we can. I did a stream on this last week, in fact, when we went over some of the reasons why this feels like a cultural shift, a major moment in history where the political winds have changed, a turning point. And I laid out some of the reasons why I felt this to be the case, some of the reasons for why, the world seems to think it, and so on. And we also talked about what we can expect to see coming out of it, and what we should be careful of looking out for as well, as there are many challenges that are inherent with becoming the cultural hegemon. The majority of those challenges, the left failed resoundingly, which is why it only remained in cultural power for about 10 years, which is remarkably short in political terms. And the right might very well do the exact same thing if it too oversteers to the same degree that the left did. But I'm very interested in hearing other people's perspective on this, and, well, here we go. Asmongold. That is definitely a perspective outside of what I usually peruse, so that's what we're going to look at. We're going to play the video at 1.5x speed, just because otherwise we'll be here for the next 40 to 50 minutes. Also, that is indeed an opened box of Pepsi in the background. Not refrigerated or anything, just standing on its side there. I don't know what triggers me the most. The fact that it's on its side, meaning that the Pepsi is, hitting the lid of the can, which means it's in contact with all those chemical thingies that flavor the drink, or that it's not refrigerated. I'm not sure. Anyways, enough waffling around. Let's get into it.
Hi guys, today I wanted to talk to you all about what I believe to be probably the biggest cultural shift that we have ever seen, if you're anywhere around my age, except for maybe September 11th. I think that this cultural shift has been observed now for about 2 to 3 years, and when it really was codified as like, yeah, this is happening, it's when Trump won the US election. And now in the aftermath of that, I think that you can very clearly see people are emboldened by that, they're galvanized by it, and people are much more willing to share their viewpoints on things that have been much more conservative, much more traditional than what I think a lot of people would, expect or maybe have you believe. And so I wanted to talk.
Okay, so immediately, spoken of 40 seconds, I need to interrupt. This is why I don't do a whole lot of response videos, because God, they get long. But anyways, okay. I wish to clarify a point here, because I do not believe that it is that people are now willing to to talk about viewpoints that are more conservative or more traditionalist. I don't think that's what's happening here. I do not believe that the Overton window has moved significantly to the right. I do not believe that the talking points we are seeing now are drastically more conservative. I mean, the talking points we are seeing now is stuff like, maybe you should put Jaguar cars in your Jaguar car commercials. That's the conservative viewpoint we have now. It is that the Overton window has shifted so far to the left that merely having basic, no-nonsense, realistic takes that we used to have all the time 10, 20 years ago have become kind of crazy sounding to at least a demographic of the US population. Again, that's the thing. It's not that people have grown radically more right-wing because of Trump. It's, if anything, it has opened our eyes to just how far the Overton window has shifted to the left. But, go on.
Today about why that actually happened, why I think it happened, and where the culture is going to be going from this perspective, right, from this direction. And so anyway, the first thing you have to do in order to explain where it's going to go is to explain where it came from. So the reason why I think a lot of this happened, and we've had a shift, and before I do that, I'll also explain where I think the shift is coming from. I think that we are shifting away from a more censorship heavy, a more, censored speech heavy, compelled speech heavy, and I think that you're seeing a lot of backlash against, what were considered to be like, protected types of thinking and protected groups of people. You're seeing a tremendous amount of backlash against it. And I think this is mainly evidenced on Twitter, but you can see this in YouTube comments, you can see this in comment sections of any game or like any video. I think that in general, you're just seeing a massive backlash against what people believe to be authoritarian levels of compelled thought and compelled speech.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And, I mean, hell, Twitter has actually gotten far more liberal with its ability to speak out, which is, again, why you are seeing more conservative thoughts on Twitter. If you visit things like Facebook, or, God help you, the comment section of many YouTube videos and so on, you will still see a far more strident level of censorship than anything we had in the past. I mean, if you compare today's YouTube to 2016 YouTube or 2012 YouTube and so on, right? Will be incomparable. We used to have a far greater degree of freedom on the internet than we do today. That is simply indisputable, I think. And yes, people have finally slowly but surely began to realize that and wake up to that fact, and then it took them a fair few years thereafter to go, okay, but why is this the case? Why is this happening? And they then turned to the left, screeching at them and creating various protected groups, like on Reddit, for example, where you have literally protected groups of people dependent upon arbitrary characteristics, and going, hold on, that's not right, that's not our society, we're not supposed to be doing that. And that rebellion then began to ferment around Donald Trump, of course, which became sort of an avatar of the right, quote unquote.
And big surprise, where did compelled thought and compelled speech come from? Where is the genesis of that recently? Definitely from COVID. And I think collectively, the government and the social media websites.
Yes, COVID was a great catalyst, absolutely. But a lot of the programs that they were trying to do, and I eventually did implement briefly during COVID, were things that they'd already been talking about. The World Economic Forum, for example, had already been talking about the Great Reset for quite some time before COVID, but it simply provided an excellent opportunity, as Klaus Schwab put it. So I wouldn't say it stems from COVID. COVID was an opportunity rather than the source of the censorship itself.
The way that they handled people that were dissenters during COVID, the way that they handled that caused a schism in the trust of the people into the government, into these companies, into anything. And I don't think that's because I don't think that disconnect is really going to be mended.
Although I suppose you could argue that there he goes, like, the people. Yes, it probably did wake up a lot more people to it, because I remember this from far earlier. Like, the example I love to go to with this is there was the first man to land a probe on an asteroid was wearing a shirt with a bikini babe on it. He was cancelled for that. The whole landing a probe on an asteroid was completely forgotten. Instead, everyone talked about his shirt, what he was wearing, and how it was sexist. And he had to make a teary apology thereafter. Like, this kind of compelled speech and cancel culture has existed long before COVID, but it was probably the point where it, hit most people's immediate consciousness.
Anytime soon. I think it's probably going to take 10 to 20 years for that trust to be rebuilt, because people would be hearing, oh, well, it's going to take 2 years, or sorry, not 2 years, excuse me, that's actually what it did take, 2 weeks to stop the spread, and just wear a mask, this will solve it, just take your vaccine, this will solve it. And I think that the messaging for COVID in general was very authoritarian in many cases, and I think that also there were countries besides the United States that were even more authoritarian without the...
Hello, England. And Norway to a degree. We actually did have curfews here for a while where you couldn't go outside. There was a lawsuit brought against the government because a part of our constitution says that men and women in Norway have the right to enjoy nature, and therefore there were legislative issues about whether or not the government could actually tell you to stay inside. But yeah, no, there was a lot of very authoritative stuff going on there, and it did a lot of damage to people's trust in the government, which, again, I think even 10 years is probably short, honestly, depending upon the governments in question, mind you, and future actions, whether or not they will continue to try to actually rebuild trust with things like DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which I think is a lovely initiative, although it remains to see whether or not it will actually do anything, or if we will see doubling down on the authoritarian nonsense.
And because of that, guess what happened? You had a lot of people who were like, yeah, this is fucking bullshit, we don't believe this, and we want to be able to think for ourselves. And when they did that on social media, they got in trouble. Now, you can think that that's a good thing, or you can think it's a bad thing. I'm not really going to try to convince you one way or another, but I think that really the big shift for that was COVID is what really started building up that resentment, and then that resentment finally boiled over, and people were able to express it when I believe Elon Musk bought Twitter. Because before Elon Musk bought Twitter, there was almost no avenue on social media that you could actually speak your mind and give a honest opinion on things, besides maybe 4chan, right, on poll. And so besides that, you couldn't really say what you think. You can't say it on Reddit. You can't say it on YouTube. YouTube is probably the most, the most liberal with that. You can pretty much say almost as much as...
This too is correct. Elon Musk. The moment Elon Musk was in essence forced to buy Twitter will probably go down in the history books, unironically. And here's also right, YouTube is sort of liberal to a degree. It's at the very least more liberal than Twitter, but it is not more liberal when it comes to free speech than, well, not Twitter, than Twitch, I meant to say, but it's definitely not more free than Twitter.
But, YouTube does still have a lot of restrictions, more so than Twitter, for example. You can't say what you want on Facebook, you can't...
This is why I hate React content, because I swear to God, half the time he's just going to continue to talk about what I exactly talked about. But hey, it's popular media for a reason, I hope.
On old Twitter, and basically all of these social media platforms that people used were used as basically tools to compel speech and to suppress people's thoughts. And I think that if you just take a step back and you think about this from an abstract, I think that you need to come to the realization that people don't like being told what to think, they don't like being told what to say, and they don't like being told that, and they don't want to be told what to do, right? I mean, at the end of the day. And so anybody who's trying to take an authoritarian stance, trying to tell you what to do, you're going to automatically get a negative response from that, at least here in the United States. And so that's how...
Mostly, yes. At least in the Western world. We could expose... you know what? No, we're still on YouTube. Let's not go there. Russia, for example.
Result of COVID. Elon Musk buys Twitter, and now all of the people who didn't exist are making up for lost time. Like, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but...
And all of the unbannings as well. Like, people don't realize how many people were banned from Twitter and how many people Elon Musk reinstated onto Twitter. A whole heaping host of conservative voices, like my friend Sargon of Akkad, for example, were brought back onto Twitter again because of Elon Musk and immediately saw massive success. Kind of partly because... my good friend Sargon has the ability to pose almost as often as Elon himself. But even more so, largely, because he's saying something that people are interested in.
There's a lot of racism on Twitter now. Oh my god. And do you want to know why there's a lot of racism on Twitter? I'll tell you why. It's because there's a lot of racist people. That's the reason anybody who can speak English all over the world, except for maybe a couple of countries, a few countries, probably more like it, can make a Twitter account and express exactly what they think. And so, big surprise, you're going to have people that live in totally different cultures expressing viewpoints that are not congruent with liberal Western values. And
this too is correct. A lot of racism on Twitter actually comes from the Middle East. Like India and stuff. Particularly if with racism we include the idea of anti-Zionism, then oh boy, yes. And also the fact that our view of racism has frankly warped quite drastically since the glory days of the 90s, where like, there is such a thing as positive, inclusive racism. When everybody was able to take shots at everybody else, this meant that everybody was welcome. Everyone was in the same club. Everyone could be grilled, in essence. This actually created a sense of unity, frankly. Like, when you're able to joke with somebody about anything and everything, that brings you closer together. Meanwhile, when you create an arbitrary language divide between one group of people and another group of people, that divide will be immediately and instinctually obvious to the people in question. Like, oh no, you can't say that word, but you can say that word. Yeah, but I'm the correct color. Like, this is an obvious injustice that becomes very obvious in, again, Western societies. So, is there more racism on Twitter? Yes. Is all of it bad? No. Is it even inherently negative? Actually, no. In fact, the very fact that we make it into this utter boogeyman that must be avoided and stomped out at all costs, like, the recent ADL nonsense, for example, where the ADL was like, oh my god, hatred is out of control on Steam. 0.3% of people have Pepe avatars. Holy shit, we're talking about such a minuscule percentage now. This isn't merely not a problem. We need a microscope to discover even the semblance of a shadow of it. Again, we pretty much had racism licked at the end of the 90s, and the left has largely brought it back up again as something to stand upon.
A very, very upsetting reality for many people that use Twitter, but in my opinion, I find it to be a very sobering fact. I think it's extremely important to know what people are actually thinking, rather than having a manicured, curated, and censored view of the world that immediately shatters whenever you introduce it to actual reality, which is what I think happened with the 2024 election. I think that people imagined this was going to happen because all of the celebrities said this was going to happen, all of mainstream media said this was going to happen, and then the day comes and it's actually something totally different. And I think that what this is really...
Totally different is an understatement. Like, the Trump swept that. But anyways.
Pushing back against basically there is a false god of authoritarianism that a lot of people online have.
Yes, we call that the Cathedral. The Cathedral is the structure of left-wing thought that dictates what is and is not acceptable, and then dictates that to the social media platforms and the governments. It is the soft power tyranny of the left that can say, oh, don't you do this, or we're gonna call you a racist. And it's not an official doctrine, it doesn't have a central leadership, it is simply the political waters in which we swim, so to say. And of course, it does have its activists and his ideologue that says what is and is not acceptable. This is why you had, for example, Ibram X. Kennedy going, anti-racism is discrimination against white people. And he was lauded for that for a while until people were like, hold on, are you saying we should discriminate to fix discrimination? And he's like, yeah, that sounds wrong, don't you think? But yes, the Cathedral.
And worshipping this false god. And I think that they are doing that because their other previous gods were determined to be false. There's always the quote of...
I like how he pointed at the anime poster when he said that.
From Nietzsche, but that's only half of the quote. The full quote is, God is dead and we have killed him. I think that the society that's totally killed God, there's no sense of religion in culture anymore, and I think that's very...
Well, no sense of religion. I would certainly say that we've replaced the sense of God with another religion, politics in this case, but that would be a bit of a side tangent, and we wouldn't want that now, would we?
Upsetting for many people. Religion is a very reassuring thing for many people. I am not a religion enjoyer, personally. I think that you guys probably know that. I'm much more of an enlightened, euphoric atheist.
Ah, the Enlightenment. But therein, of course, lies the problem. If we are indeed so enlightened, why is it that people keep seeking meaning, something greater than themselves? In politics, in this case, people continue to flock to the opiate of the masses. It's just that we've changed the name from God to DEI.
Today, I can recognize that it does have an ordering, I guess, like, function in a lot of people's lives. And so when you're taking that away from people and they don't have access to what would be a way to order the universe and a way to see how things are, they're going to invent their own way to order things. And I think that the way that they did that was they replaced religion with political dogma. And I think this has happened in a lot of cases. And really, people that attach their meaning and, like, their identity and, like, their feelings onto these different movements, I think that for many of them, they're looking for something that religion or some form of, like, existential reassurance would give them. And I think that the movements, whether it's a political movement, whether it's a social movement, whether it's a social cause, I think that those movements actually, for a lot of people now, are filling the place that religion previously had. And I think that if you don't think that's true, just look at how they fucking defend them. I swear to God, there's people, you get less pushback from blasphemy in a lot of churches. And so, yes, people get very, very, very...
True. Like, people build their entire understanding of the world on this. We saw this with Ragnar Turnquist and Dustborn, for example, where he was, even when Trump was first elected, like, this was a devastating realization. Like, oh my God, my entire world is crumbling. We were winning. We were the good guys. What is happening? Like, they create an absolute truth worldview in their mind, and when that turns out to not actually be the case, the psychological damage is pretty devastating to a lot of people.
Things because they built their entire identity off of them. And I think also this is especially true with young people. And with young people, it's that they've had unironic arrested development from COVID. And I think this is true not just for, it's like, oh, the kids are retarded. No. I think this has happened for a lot of people, including young adults.
Skibbity Riz toilet. The children are retarded. No, I'm joking. I remember the kind of shit I watched on YouTube when I was a child. If anything, it was worse.
People that spend, let's say the ages of, like 15 to 18, locked down in COVID, well, big fucking surprise. Whenever they turn 18, they're not going to know how to act, and they're going to probably still be acting like 15-year-olds. And so you have people...
Oh, shit, 18-year-olds. I mean, this is actually a result, not just of COVID, but of our modern-day education system as well, where it is socially acceptable, and indeed halfway almost expected, that people will stay in school till they're, like, in their mid-30s, or even mid-20s to 30s. Like, you've got educations that last decades. Like, people don't actually enter into the real world until they've spent another 10 years in basic schooling and then 10 years surrounded by academia. Of course, their understanding of what is and isn't real is going to be completely formed by the last 20 years plus of their existence. Like, the coddled space of university will to them be reality. And so when they end up in a tiny rat-infested apartment in New York with a debt hanging over their neck, yeah, a lot of them are going to have a hard time coping.
mentally, basically arrested, and they've taken 3 years of like social development and socialization and just pretty much outsourced it to a social media website that's fed them a worldview that's completely distorted. It doesn't represent anything in real life, and now they go into real life, and the dissonance between what they believe the world should be and what the world is gets bigger and bigger, and I think it makes people angrier and angrier. And I think that that's really where a lot of the hostility is coming from. It's the refutation of those types of people that have used political dogma and social, like socio-political issues, and they've replaced religion with these things. It is a pushback against those people. And the reason why I think this pushback is happening is very simple. It's because people just don't want to hear what they're saying, and they don't agree with it. It's really...
Yes, like this will return us to Jonathan Haid's moral foundations, of course, where it does genuinely appear as if people today have developed two systems of values that are so separate from one another that we are not capable of perceiving the other side's virtues and values. Like, we look at the same thing, and if we value it differently to the point where a leftist might go, this is the holy grail, and a right-winger might go, no, that's not the most important thing ever. And even worse, in the reverse, of course, is the fact that whilst the right, according to John Thay's moral foundations again, seem to value all of the morals relatively similarly, the left actually views certain right-wing moral foundations as not only just irrelevant, but as in active opposition to their own. They view them as straight negative combatants, as enemy moral values. And if you have a society like that, where the two parties can't really communicate because they don't even live in the same existence and they don't value the same things anymore, it's very hard to have any sort of reconciliation.
Time you were not able to express your disagreements. You were not able to tell anybody that, like, yeah, I don't actually think this is true, this isn't really what's happening, and because you would get banned. But that all changed when Elon Musk bought Twitter. Because when Elon Musk bought Twitter, everybody who had an opinion was able to say what that opinion was, for better or for worse. And I think that we've seen a lot of both of those. And so now what we've had is that
That too is true. Having sex with a condom on is gay sex. That's definitely a degree of both sides in this.
Uniquely emboldened in a way that they hadn't really in probably 10 years on social media, given the level of censorship and control. And now people are going and saying what they really think. And I think that they're doing so in a manner that is making up for lost time. And another big component for this is that I think that there has been what I would really kind of refer to as emotional blackmail that's been going on for a very, very long time, where you can't have certain opinions about certain topics because it can be perceived as being mean, or you can be seen as a bad person. I think that there's been a level of fatigue that is caused for people, and it's like eventually, like, for example, somebody thinking that they don't want illegal immigrants in their country, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're like a racist or a Nazi. And so because of that, and the emotional escalation and the emotional blackmail that people use in order to try to force people into having these certain types of worldviews, the optics of these arguments oftentimes become more important than the arguments themselves. It's kind of like what I've said before, is that the strongest argument isn't an argument. Many people do not operate based off of logic or reasoning. They operate based off of emotion and feeling. And big surprise, that's been what's taken over a lot of things. And also, this is a very important component. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. It's not like this is totally going away. I think that we're just replacing one form.
As an extension on the emotional blackmail thing as well, it's also the fact that the accusations, which were absolutely used actively and aggressively as weapons to denigrate and destroy their opposition, in the finest Gramscian manner, of course, with the idea being to undermine what we see as our normal society and replacing it with pillars of their own preferred society, these accusations became less and less effective, to the point where, as Asmongold mentions here, the accusation of, no, you're a Nazi because you don't want illegal immigrants, has watered down the accusation of Nazi to the point now that if you accuse somebody of it, the majority response will be, yeah, sure, and that'll be about it. Hell, even accusations of racism now are just shrugged away. Even if you have arrived at a situation where it's classical boy who cried wolf, isn't it? Even if you had somebody who was an actual, unironic, unrepentant Nazi, and somebody called him that, I would look at that person and go, but is he though? You know?
To me. And I think that really what's going to continue to happen is you're going to have more people pushing back against, established social norms as much as possible, and making a push more towards traditionalism, more towards...
Again, I think this is more of a result of the movement of the Overton window, rather than the actual establishment of social norms. I do not believe that wokeism is by any stretch of the imagination a social norm. I do not believe that the Jaguar commercial is a social norm. I do in fact believe that the the landslide election of Donald Trump in 2024 was a very clear and concise indicator that wokeism is not the norm, and that people are now waking up with not more conservative opinions, but normal opinions. The goal of the right wing right now is not to go crazy far right, it is to simply remain normal. That should be our goal, to stay bloody normal.
And I think that this is also happening again because of that lack of meaning and culture. You don't have the same shared culture that something like a religion provides, and because of that, you're having tons of people that don't know what to do with their life. They don't know who they are, they don't know what their identity is, because the previous things and previous lives that have given them that identity are now being taken away or have been taken away. I think probably the best example of that is with jobs. So when somebody has their job replaced by AI or replaced with automation, and they're not able to get a new one or something like that, and they are disconnected from the value of their work, I think that again, there's something that's existential that's taken away from that person, because now they no longer can take pride and take pleasure in the idea that they have done good work and they are contributing to their community or they are doing something that's positive. And of course, obviously, why is that? Number one, it's because a lot of these jobs are, computer jobs, and so it's not really as directly evident in the same way that, you can do something that's more physical. That's number one. And then also number two is they're not really being paid very well. So you have people that have shitty jobs, they're not being paid very well. And guess what? They're looking for some form of meaning in life and somebody to tell them that that worldview is not going to last. Things are going to keep getting better. And anybody that sells that person a solution is going to have a lot of fucking buyers.
True, but we then also have to question, why is this happening in the first place? Why is there a disenfranchised mass to which the demagogues can speak? That's the thing, suddenly Germany voted for Hitler. No, Germany voted for Hitler because the Weimar Republic was goddamn insane. It was because a single American dollar was worth like 1.4 million Reichsmarks and so on. That's why the presence of a disenfranchised mass is an indication of a problem. It isn't simply something that just emerges, right? If America had taken the actions required 10, 20 years ago to focus on automation instead of shipping their jobs over to China, which is what it was, English, which is what it did for short-term gain, then this problem wouldn't exist today. But, well, this comes with the idea that you want the thing now, and you're willing to sacrifice tomorrow for the thing now. The Europe, for example, and Greece in particular, suffered enormously from ever-increasing social healthcare programs and social programs in general, to the point where, Greece, as example, the country literally bankrupted itself on luxuries that it could not afford, that it knew it could not afford, and that, in turn, created that disenfranchised mass. The disenfranchised mass is not so much it's not so much created by AI or automation. Like AI only popped up like the last couple of years, and automation too is, it's not like we're lacking production capability or production demand, shall we say. Seeing all of these goods produced in China, there's no reason why this couldn't be produced in the US for an equal price with American workers with the aid of automation. Currently, there is an enormous demand for goods, far more than anything we could ever satisfy at the moment. And so even if you automate, you wouldn't automate by replacing one worker. Preferably, you would take that one worker and teach him how to operate 10 robots. Now, that is, of course, not always possible, but as someone who does work, who did work and has a family company that does work in automation, that is the ideal, not the replacing a dude with a robot, because you don't really gain that much from doing simply that.
Very clearly what's happened. So what I expect to see happen now is that you're going to see probably a lot of people who have been pushing back against the culture of cancel culture and people getting, banned for having wrong opinions on things. Obviously, it'll still happen sometimes. I don't know, maybe I've got an example of that one way or another. But I think that, of course, sometimes that will still happen, but it has been much less common. And you're even seeing things like, I think that another benchmark for this is that, you can look back at the Hogwarts legacy, the debacle with that and how angry everybody was with J.K. Rowling. And now that there's a new Harry Potter project, the studio that's doing it has even said, it's her freedom of speech. She can think what she wants.
They did do that, and it's not because they value freedom of speech, it's because J.K. Rowling has the balls in her hands right now, and HBO would like to earn some money.
I think that is a tremendous divergence from what previously was the case, where you were not able to have certain opinions about certain topics like that. J.K. Rowling had controversial opinions about trans people. Whether you agree with them or not, you have to acknowledge.
I don't know if I have to agree with that, honestly, but I get your point.
People. And because of that, people didn't want Harry Potter existing anymore, right? And I think that after that kind of reaches its logical conclusion, where it's no longer seen as a reasonable response, and now it's just like an overcorrection that is fueled primarily by anger and frustration, then you're really going to see people kind of lose interest with that type of movement. And I think that's exactly what's happened. I think that a lot of people are just tired of having their opinions dictated to them. They're tired of not being able to think things that they believe are just a priori knowledge. Like, this is just, it is known to be the case. Obviously, there's a difference between men and women, etc. And this big split has happened, and now there aren't the same censorship apparatuses that maintain the previous power structure. And so you're seeing tons of people now speaking out against it, and really nothing happening because of it, for better or for worse, again. And so I think you're going to continue seeing that happen. You're going to continue seeing people pushing back against like these mainstream narratives. And I think that the pushback will eventually become just as oppressive as the narrative originally was, because that's
potentially. But again, we return to the idea that at the moment we aren't seeing that much more in the way of hyper-conservative talking points, with some exceptions admittedly here and there. But the goal must now be to halt the pendulum as much as possible in the relative normal of the 90s and 2000s. That is what I talked about in my live stream, for example. The goal needs to be to remain normal. The pendulum swinging is not an inevitability. We do not need to become our enemies. We can be better than that, but it will require, well, some active pushback earlier rather than later, probably.
Things always keep going until there's too much, and they always stop when there's too little, right?
And yes, I know I'm hopeless and naive with this, but hey, I like to hope that it's possible, okay?
You know, people love to radicalize, people love to become extreme, and I think the internet has provided a perfect place for people to radicalize themselves. And I think it's happened because of the lack of meaning with religion. I think it's happened because of the lack of meaning with, you know, gainful employment. I think it's happened with the lack of meaning culturally. There's no sense of, like, you know, shared culture in the U.S., at least not as much as whenever I was a kid, I would say. And I think you put all these things together, and you have an existential crisis that an individual has, and they're looking for anybody to replace that. And where a lot of these, like, socio-political movements come from, that's why you're seeing a lot of people get back more into.
That's also the thing, though, because the Gramscian idea is to replace the ideas of liberalism and the Western values of the world with those of socialism. And that is what they've done fairly effectively in many cases. What we need is a strong Western identity. We need our own esprit du corps, it's in essence. And we used to have that to a degree, but patriotism, of course, became a very dirty word. And hopefully it is becoming less of a dirty word these days, but we need to regain our pride in Western exceptionalism. And that's going to have some interesting consequences if we go far enough down that path. But we do need to have a unified sense of self, even though this did also produce some problematic results, like liberalism in general becoming the religion of the West, where we are going to condemn other nations, not necessarily because of what they are doing is all that unreasonable, but because it goes against the tenets of liberalism, which has in many people's minds been, well, the replacement for God.
Making a pretty big comeback, and I think the reason for that is because people are looking for that antidote of modern existence. They're looking for, like, the way that they can order the world that makes sense, because the way that people are talking about it on the internet really doesn't. And so I wanted to talk about this because I think it's a very interesting thing, and I think it's going to shift the way that all media is portrayed. Now, obviously, things like this are a very big boat. It takes a long time to turn, but you can already see that happening with people that had previously, like, problematic opinions, etc., just kind of get ignored in a way that I don't think would have happened 3 or 4 years ago. And if you want my personal opinion on the whole thing, I think that's a good thing. I feel like the amount of, as I said before, emotional blackmail and censorship and compelled speech that was on the internet for, I'd say the last, maybe, I'd say like from 2017 or 18 to like 2022, somewhere around there, I think that it did radicalize a lot of people. I wouldn't really consider myself radicalized, but I would consider myself very aware. And now I am extremely skeptical of any type of censorship. I'm very skeptical of any type of, you know, compelled thought or compelled speech. And I'm in general the kind of guy that believes that the best, you know, reaction to, you know, bad speech is good speech that counters it. And, you know, in the free marketplace of ideas, the best ideas will usually win out. So I wanted to make this video and talk about it because I've never really had the opportunity to, like, really formulate what I really believe with this kind of stuff. And hopefully you guys can kind of see how this shift has happened and how you've observed it yourself. And I'd be curious in the comments, other kind of barometers or, like, temperature checks you've seen and where you've kind of seen, oh, wow, yeah.
Okay, so we've pretty much entered into the wrap-up phase of this now, but yes, no, largely I do agree. It is a cultural shift, there are different reasons for it, and I do think we're basically fairly closely aligned with a lot of this, which is also kind of interesting in a way. But it is definitely a loss of purpose, and the attempt to find a new purpose. Now, ideally, that purpose should be to return to Monkey, return to normality, instead of simply just repeating the errors of the movement that we just defeated. That would be the ideal, of course. But it is always difficult to halt the pendulum, isn't it? But I will also point out that there's a wonderful old video game by the name of Myth, where once you kill Soul Blighter, which, see, in this world, the world is doomed to always repeat the same circle. Evil always returns. It always pushes humanity to the brink of annihilation, then humanity rallies and defeats evil for a while, and then evil returns, and so on and so on. But in one game, evil gets impatient. Evil makes a move too early. And when evil is destroyed that time, it is hinted at that this might possibly break the cycle. Evil overplayed its hand. It broke the rules. It broke tradition. And thus it defeated itself. I think that is an interesting analogy for the left. The left overplayed its hand, enormously so. It became a byword for cringe nonsense. And now its touch is de facto death, as we see with companies like Sweet Baby Inc., whose mere association with the game is enough to ruin its economic prospect. I believe the sheer scale of the left's failure may give an opportunity for the center to reassert itself over the right. Well, I guess we will see about that, but that is my naive hope, at least. So, now the job is up to all of you to spam Asmongold with this video. Do it. Do it now. Should probably put that at the beginning of the video instead at the end here, where there's going to be like 5 of you left. But hey, details, details. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.